Look, if you're an expert meditator, a neuroscientist, or one of those polymaths constantly optimizing your cognitive frameworks, you already know the deal. Your brain's baseline state completely dictates your reality. So in this explainer, we're skipping all the introductory fluff. We are going straight into the deep systems dynamics of the default mode network, or DMN. We're going to unpack exactly what happens to your neural architecture during advanced contemplative states, and, crucially, how you can strategically leverage those exact mechanics. And we're not just talking about achieving profound presence here, but actually using this for radical creative synthesis. All right, let's just dive right into it.
20%. Think about that for a second. Even when you're just sitting there staring blankly out a window at wakeful rest, your default mode network is burning through roughly 20% of your brain's total metabolic energy. Now, evolution absolutely does not waste that kind of massive metabolic investment on a cognitive bug, right? Mind wandering isn't just some failure of concentration. It's a highly active, totally crucial biological simulation. Your DMN is running some seriously sophisticated programs in the background. It's consolidating memories, processing emotions, and maintaining your entire autobiographical sense of self. It is literally the engine of your internal narrative. But to understand how to actually control this engine, we really need to map its structural anatomy within what we call the triple network model. So first, we've got the default mode network, which is anchored by the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the precuneus. Again, that's your internal simulator. Next up is the central executive network, or CNEN. This one is driven by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and posterior parietal cortex. This is your external, highly goal-directed focus. And finally, you have the salience network. This features the interior insula and interior cingulate cortex. You can think of the salience network as the master switch. It detects relevant stimuli and decides which of the other two networks gets to take the wheel.
Now here's where it gets interesting. There's this fundamental antagonistic relationship between the CEN and the DMN. It's basically a neural seesaw. When your central executive network is locked into a highly demanding external task, say complex problem solving, it becomes task positive, and the DMN gets heavily suppressed. But the moment that task ends, the CEN quiets down, and the DMN instantly rebounds, becoming task negative. And sitting right there in the middle is your salience network, acting as this dynamic fulcrum. It's constantly scanning, detecting what needs your attention, and deciding which side of the seesaw gets the metabolic green light.
So what happens when we intentionally stress test the seesaw? Well, we can look at the timeline of a Stroop task. You know the one. It's that classic cognitive conflict test, where, for example, the word blue is printed in red ink. Functional MRI studies of experienced Zen monks doing this exact task reveals something pretty remarkable. To quickly resolve those conflicting stimuli, their central executive network actively and powerfully suppresses the DMN, specifically targeting that medial prefrontal cortex. These monks are basically using their highly trained CN to just cut right through the noise. They inhibit that default mind-wandering state to execute flawless, rapid cognitive control. Section 1. Neurodynamics of the meditation state. Okay, let's shift our focus from the basic architecture to the deliberate, top-down neurocognitive control that you initiate the very second you sit on the cushion. We can map the precise cognitive cycle of focused meditation using Hasenkamp's four-stage model. Step 1. Your mind wanders. That is pure DMN activity. Step 2, you realize your mind has wandered. Boom, that's your salience network firing up, tagging that internal distraction as a salient event. Step 3, shifting your attention back to the breath. Here, the salience network is literally handing control over to the central executive network. And finally, step 4, sustained attention. This is where the CEN maintains that external or interoceptive focus, actively keeping the DMN suppressed. So, as a meditator, you are quite literally doing network handover reps. Let's look under the hood at the actual neurochemistry here, because it's fascinating. When you sustain that attention, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is basically the powerhouse of your CEN, starts actively downregulating the DMN's central hubs. How? It deploys GABAergic inhibition directly into the medial prefrontal cortex. You are effectively walking over to your ego center and turning down the volume dial. And even more profoundly, this mechanism structurally decouples the MPFC from the amygdala. This right here is exactly why meditation reduces anxiety. You are actively severing the link between your autobiographical self-referencing and your brain's primary threat detection center. Section 2. Trait evolution and homeostatic rebound. So what happens when you train this top-down regulation for, say, thousands of hours?
To track how these repeated temporary state inductions actually forge permanent neuroplastic traits, neuroscientists use some very precise neuroimaging metrics. Specifically, they look at positive diametric activity, or PDA, of the fractional amplitude of low-frequency fluctuations. I know it's a mouthful, but this metric precisely quantifies the strengths of the anti-correlation between your DMN and your CEN after you're done meditating. It lets researchers see not just what your brain is doing on the cushion, but how that antagonistic seesaw remains fundamentally altered when you get up and just go about your daily life. Let's look at how this actually evolves by comparing intermediate and advanced practitioners. For intermediate meditators, we're talking folks with less than about 1,130 hours of practice, we see a really highly active, effortful suppression. Their CEN is basically constantly wrestling the DMN into submission, which results in this very strong, active anti-correlation. But for advanced meditators who have crossed that 1,130-hour threshold, something absolutely incredible happens. The intense anti-correlation actually normalizes, but DMN activity remains vastly reduced. They achieve this effortless, sustained reduction in mind wandering. Basically, the wrestling match is over. The DMN has just been trained to stay quiet. And that brings us to the crucial concept of homeostatic rebound. Through repeated, deliberate suppression over time, your brain actually recalibrates. It literally stops fighting to return to that noisy, mind-wandering default state. Instead, it establishes a completely transformed baseline of continuous, effortless, mindful presence. Those temporary periods of DMN suppression overlap and stack up until they just become your new, stable default trait. This is the exact neurobiological signature of contemplative mastery. Section 3, leveraging the DMN for radical creativity. Now, as polymaths and thinkers, we really have to challenge this popular assumption that the DMN is purely a pathology of distraction that needs to be permanently silenced. Because in reality, the default mode network is an absolutely indispensable engine for divergent problem solving. It's what allows your mind to wander freely, to form connections between incredibly distant ideas, to reflect on past knowledge and incubate future possibilities. You know when you're staring at a complex physics problem or a huge strategic bottleneck and you make zero progress, but then the answer suddenly pops into your head while you're taking a shower? Yeah, that is your DMN running massive subconscious associative processing in the background. So to truly optimize our thinking, we have to strategically toggle between two distinct modes. The focused mode is CN-driven. It's narrow, analytical, sequential, and highly effortful. It's how you learn the parameters of a problem in the first place. But the diffuse mode is DMN-driven. It's relaxed, broad, and unconstrained. It operates quietly in the background, integrating brand new knowledge with your existing mental frameworks. The reality is, you simply cannot achieve radical breakthroughs using only the focused mode. You have to step back and allow the DMN to take over so it can connect all those disparate data points.
Okay, so how do we actually operationalize this? Well, here is a strategic protocol for cognitive switching, and it's perfectly optimized for 90-minute ultradian cycles. Step 1. You engage in intense, structured focus utilizing your CEN. Step 2. You intentionally push yourself until you hit a cognitive stall. Step 3, and this is the vital pivot, you step away entirely. Remove the digital distractions, go take a walk, do the dishes, whatever. Step 4, this triggers unconscious incubation, allowing your salience network to hand the problem over to the DMN. And finally, step 5, the DMN synthesizes all those distant connections, handing you that radical out-of-nowhere insight.
Which brings us to one final, slightly provocative thought to leave you with today. You now understand the precise neurodynamics of how advanced meditation effortlessly silences your default mode network to achieve profound presence. But as a creator, a thinker, and a polymath, how are you going to systematically and strategically re-engage that very same network to incubate your next radical insight? Because at the end of the day, mastering the mind isn't just about achieving total silence. It's about knowing exactly when it's time to play the music. Think on that. And until next time, keep exploring the limits of your cognitive architecture.